WWE quietly retired a number of match types that turned out to be too dangerous, ridiculous, or just humiliating, and most of them will shock you with how extreme they actually were. We're talking about matches fought 20 feet above concrete, stipulations involving actual attack dogs, and one that literally forced wrestlers to strip each other down to their underwear in front of thousands of fans. Each one tells a story about wrestling's wildest experiments and why they'll never happen again. Hell in a Cell. The original Hell in a Cell matches were so brutal that WWE's legal team probably needed therapy after watching them. We're talking about matches that made executives question whether the show was still entertainment or an accident waiting to happen. The early Hell in a Cell concept was designed to be the ultimate cage match, with the massive steel structure acting as both a prison and a weapon that could destroy careers in seconds. The early Hell in a Cell era in the late 90s became notoriously brutal, with spots that blurred the line between spectacle and real danger. The idea was simple but terrifying. Take the traditional steel cage match and make it bigger, more dangerous, and completely inescapable. The cell created a steel tomb that wrestlers couldn't climb out of. Unlike regular cage matches where escape was the goal, Hell in a Cell was about trapping two people inside until one of them couldn't continue. The steel mesh wasn't just a barrier, it became a weapon that could tear flesh and break bones. The violence reached its peak during matches that pushed WWE beyond what could be shown on regular programming. Wrestlers took falls from dangerous heights that made everyone realize this wasn't just wrestling anymore. The drama came from genuine danger, not just wrestling theatrics. Every bump felt like a potential career ender because they actually were. The legendary toughness of wrestlers like Mick Foley made these matches memorable, but it also exposed how dangerous Hell in a Cell had become. WWE executives watched these matches and slowly realized they were broadcasting what looked like actual crime scenes. The blood, the real injuries, and the genuine fear on people's faces made it clear that this level of violence wasn't sustainable. Insurance companies started asking uncomfortable questions. Medical personnel became a regular part of Hell in a Cell matches because serious injuries were expected, not just possible. The company had created something that was more dangerous than entertaining. Safety concerns forced WWE to completely rethink what Hell in a Cell could be. The original ultra-violent version had to be toned down dramatically. The cell structure stayed the same, but the expectation of life-threatening bumps disappeared. Wrestlers stopped taking insane risks on top of the cell. The matches became more controlled and less likely to result in genuine medical emergencies. WWE also avoided repeating the ultra-saturated multi-man Hell in a Cell spectacles that had defined the stipulation's most dangerous era. This dramatic transformation shows just how far WWE had to pull back from the edge. Modern Hell in a Cell matches are basically regular matches with decorative fencing around them. The cell is still there, but it's become more of a visual element than an actual weapon. The ultra-violent spectacles that made the original matches famous are gone forever, banned not by rules, but by basic human safety concerns. If the cell looked unsafe, scaffold matches took danger vertical, literally putting wrestlers in situations where they had to choose between winning and surviving the night. Scaffold matches. Scaffold matches represented wrestling's most terrifying gamble with gravity, where one wrong move could end a career or worse. The concept sounds insane when you break it down. Take two wrestlers and make them fight on a narrow platform suspended 15 to 20 feet above concrete floors. Gravity became the most dangerous opponent in the ring, and it never missed. These matches placed wrestlers on elevated platforms that turned every move into a potential disaster. The setup was simple but deadly. Construct wooden or metal scaffolding high above the arena floor and force wrestlers to fight on top of it. Victory came from knocking your opponent off the platform, which meant the entire match was built around the idea of making someone fall from a dangerous height. The visual was incredible, but the physics were terrifying. The concept seemed exciting in theory, until people started actually falling from these heights. Promoters loved the dramatic visual of wrestlers fighting in the air, but they didn't fully consider what would happen when gravity took over. Promotions that used scaffold-style spots included WA/World Championship Wrestling at Starrcade '86 and ECW's high-incident match in 1996. A fall from 20 feet onto concrete isn't something the human body can handle safely, even with wrestling training. The infamous Starrcade 1986 scaffold match between the Road Warriors and the Midnight Express showed exactly why these matches were too dangerous. Even controlled falls carried devastating injury potential. Wrestlers had to time their falls perfectly and hope the landing area was properly prepared, but there's no safe way to fall 20 feet. The match ended with wrestlers actually falling from the scaffold, creating genuine fear that someone might be seriously hurt or killed on live television. The visual payoff of fighting at dangerous heights came at an unacceptable price in safety. Promoters got their dramatic shots of wrestlers battling in midair, but the cost was putting human beings in genuinely life-threatening situations. The platforms weren't designed for wrestling moves, just basic weight support. Wrestlers couldn't perform their normal moves without risking a fall, which meant the matches became boring and repetitive. Wrestlers had to navigate fragile platforms while trying to maintain wrestling psychology, creating an impossible situation. They couldn't use their normal movesets because any aggressive action might send someone falling. The platforms were too narrow for proper wrestling techniques. Wrestlers spent most of their time carefully moving around the structure instead of actually wrestling, which defeated the entire purpose of having a wrestling match. A controlled fall from 15 to 20 feet is never truly safe. The narrow platform limited actual wrestling, slowed pacing, and risked catastrophic injury, which made promoters and insurers back away. Medical personnel couldn't guarantee they could help someone who fell from that height. Insurance companies wouldn't cover the matches. WWE never fully embraced scaffold matches because they recognized that the setup made catastrophic injury inevitable, not just possible. The company learned that some visual spectacles aren't worth the human cost. Some stipulations are just too dangerous for human beings to attempt safely, while others crossed different lines entirely. Bra and panties matches represented the Attitude Era's most problematic approach to women's wrestling. These matches had no pins, submissions, or disqualifications because they weren't really wrestling matches at all. The goal was simple: strip your opponent down to their underwear in front of a live audience. There were no wrestling skills involved, no athletic competition, and definitely no respect for the women forced to participate in these segments. Victory came from successfully removing another person's clothes, which tells you everything you need to know about what WWE thought women's wrestling should be during the late 1990s. These segments prioritized visual appeal and spectacle over athletic competition, creating matches that operated purely as eye candy with zero athletic framework. WWE treated these as legitimate match types, complete with entrances, referee involvement, and crowd reactions. But everyone knew what was really happening. Professional female athletes were being reduced to participants in what amounted to televised strip shows. Producers often framed these matches with camera angles and presentation choices designed to emphasize the visual element rather than wrestling ability. WWE eventually realized they had female athletes who could actually wrestle, making these stipulations look increasingly ridiculous. Women like Lita, Trish Stratus, and others proved that female wrestlers could deliver legitimate athletic performances that rivaled their male counterparts. The contrast became embarrassing. Some nights you'd see genuinely skilled female wrestlers having competitive matches, and other nights you'd see bra and panties matches that treated women like objects instead of athletes. These segments epitomized late 90s wrestling's problematic approach to women's wrestling, treating athletes like performers in a different kind of show entirely. WWE had talented women on their roster who trained just as hard as the men, but the company kept booking them in scenarios that had nothing to do with wrestling ability. The message was clear. Women's value in WWE came from their appearance, not their athletic skills or entertainment abilities. Behind-the-scenes discussions began pushing for more legitimate, skill-focused wrestling. Women's wrestling in other promotions was evolving and becoming more respected, while WWE was still stuck in outdated approaches that diminished their female performers. The shift toward PG programming made lingerie-based stipulations impossible to justify on mainstream television. Both match types were quietly dropped after WWE's shift to PG programming in 2008. The company couldn't present itself as suitable for all ages, while simultaneously featuring segments designed around removing women's clothing. WWE's move toward respect and legitimacy in women's wrestling made these matches look like relics from a different era. The company started promoting women's wrestling as legitimate athletic competition, which meant acknowledging that bra and panties matches were fundamentally disrespectful to the performers involved. Dropping these stipulations helped set the stage for the women's evolution, more in-ring credibility, and main event opportunities. While these matches were banned for being too degrading, other stipulations crossed even darker lines that made WWE executives genuinely uncomfortable with what they were presenting as entertainment. Buried alive matches. Symbolic death fit WWE's supernatural angles, but staging an actual grave was both a production headache and an optics problem for family programming. The company was fine with supernatural characters, zombie storylines, and even matches that ended with people getting in storyline terms. But when it came to actually burying someone alive on television, even WWE's creative team realized they might have gone too far into genuinely disturbing territory. Buried alive matches married theatrical spectacle to genuinely morbid undertones, requiring actual graves and heavy dirt. The concept debuted in 1996 at In Your House 11, when The Undertaker faced Mankind in what became wrestling's most macabre stipulation. Victory required dragging your opponent to a pre-dug grave near the entrance ramp and burying them under a mound of dirt, using shovels or even dump trucks. The visual was striking but deeply unsettling. The format's symbolic death imagery became increasingly uncomfortable, even for a company that regularly featured supernatural characters. WWE had zombies, demons, and undead wrestlers as regular performers. But there was something different about literally burying people alive on television. The symbolism was too direct and too real. Viewers weren't watching fantasy violence anymore. They were watching what looked like actual murder and burial. The logistical nightmare of staging these matches created serious production challenges. WWE had to construct reinforced graves filled with real soil near the entrance ramp, often with hidden trapdoors to ensure wrestler safety. The matches required heavy machinery, extra personnel, and precise timing to execute the burial sequence effectively. The risks were significant. Wrestlers faced potential suffocation, injuries during the burial process, and visibility issues that made the matches dangerous for everyone involved. Even The Undertaker's supernatural character couldn't justify the morbid reality of literally burying opponents alive on television. The dead man's persona worked because it was clearly theatrical, but buried alive matches made the death theme too literal. Watching The Undertaker actually bury someone under dirt crossed from fantasy into something that looked genuinely disturbing. PG-era expectations made matches ending in symbolic burial impossible to present to family audiences. When WWE transitioned toward more family-friendly content, the graphic nature of burying people alive clashed completely with their new direction. Parents weren't comfortable letting their children watch matches that ended with live burial, no matter how fake it was supposed to be. Some theatrical concepts are just too dark even for sports entertainment. WWE learned that there's a difference between supernatural storytelling and imagery that's genuinely morbid. The company could present death as a character trait or storyline element, but actually showing burial crossed into territory that made audiences uncomfortable. These matches faded from regular programming, as even the dead man had to retire from grave-digging duties. The last Buried Alive match aired in 2010 at Bragging Rights when Kane buried The Undertaker, marking the end of wrestling's most morbid stipulation. While burial proved too dark for WWE's standards, at least those matches maintained some level of dignity and control. The same couldn't be said for the next one, Kennel from Hell. The Kennel from Hell took place at Unforgiven 1999 and featured Al Snow versus Big Boss Man in what became wrestling's ultimate disaster, a spectacle so failed that WWE never attempted anything like it again. This match was so catastrophically bad that it essentially banned itself from ever happening again. What happened that night created television's worst wrestling match and proved that some ideas should never leave the writing room. The ambitious but doomed concept combined Hell in a Cell with a steel cage and filled the space between with trained attack dogs. WWE's creative team thought they could improve on the Hell in a Cell formula by adding another cage inside it and placing aggressive guard dogs in the narrow walkway between the two structures. The idea was that wrestlers would have to escape both cages while avoiding attack dogs that would prevent their escape. The dogs proved completely unpredictable under live television pressure, creating chaos instead of danger. What WWE expected to be vicious guard animals turned into confused pets who had no idea what they were supposed to do. The live television environment with bright lights, loud crowd noise, and unfamiliar surroundings made the dogs behave in ways that completely destroyed the intended atmosphere. The dogs were more interested in bathroom breaks than being vicious guard animals, with urination and random barking ruining the intended atmosphere. Instead of creating menacing tension, the dogs defecated and urinated all over the floor between the cages. They barked at random times, sniffed around looking for food, and even began mating on live television. The supposed attack dogs acted like regular household pets who were confused about why they were at a wrestling show. The concept collapsed under safety concerns and immediate public backlash from animal rights groups. WWE hadn't considered how animal welfare organizations would react to using dogs as wrestling props. The company faced criticism for putting animals in a stressful environment for entertainment purposes. Safety became a major issue because WWE couldn't control what the dogs would do during the match. The dogs' lack of genuine aggression exposed the fundamental flaw in trying to use live animals as wrestling props. WWE learned that you can't script animal behavior the way you script wrestling matches. The dogs weren't trained attack animals. They were regular dogs who had no understanding of their role in the show. They couldn't be directed or controlled like human performers. This unforgiven 1999 experiment became a textbook example of how cross-pollinating gimmicks can implode spectacularly. Taking two existing concepts and combining them doesn't automatically create something better. The double cage structure made it hard for cameras to capture the action, while the dogs provided unwanted distractions instead of additional drama. The wrestling was terrible because the cage setup restricted movement. The visual was confusing because audiences couldn't see through two sets of cage walls. The dogs provided comedy instead of menace. The whole concept fell apart within minutes of starting. After the match, WWE shelved any future live animal stipulations due to the unpredictability of animals and heavy public backlash from animal welfare concerns. This match stands as wrestling's ultimate cautionary tale about what happens when live production risks meet animal unpredictability. WWE never attempted another match involving live animals because the Kennel from Hell proved that some experiments are too risky and too unpredictable to ever repeat. While the Kennel from Hell failed because of uncontrollable chaos, other banned stipulations crossed different boundaries that made WWE executives genuinely uncomfortable with what they were presenting as entertainment. I Quit matches with extreme weapons. Some I Quit matches crossed the line from sports entertainment into what looked like actual torture sessions. These weren't your typical wrestling matches where someone tapped out or got pinned. The whole point was to inflict enough pain on your opponent that they would verbally give up by saying those two words, "I quit." What made these matches disturbing was how real the suffering looked when extreme weapons got involved. The I Quit stipulation was designed to push wrestlers to their breaking point, but extreme weapons made it genuinely uncomfortable to watch. The basic concept made sense for wrestling. Create a match where mental toughness mattered more than athletic ability. Wrestlers had to endure punishment until they couldn't take anymore. The problem started when creative teams decided regular wrestling moves weren't enough to make these matches feel authentic. I Quit matches sometimes leaned on extreme hardcore spots during the Attitude Era and the broader hardcore period. WWE eventually pulled back from genuinely injurious props, like the frequent use of thumbtacks in hardcore matches, by the PG shift around 2008. Performers like Cactus Jack, Terry Funk, and the Dudley Boys made those spots infamous, but the company realized these weapons served no athletic purpose beyond inflicting genuine suffering on live television. Specific examples of extreme weapons made audiences question whether they were watching wrestling or something much darker. When wrestlers used implements that could cause genuine injuries, the line between performance and reality disappeared completely. These weapons that actually cut skin and drew real blood made viewers uncomfortable because the pain was obviously authentic. The focus shifted from athletic competition to methods that looked disturbingly real. Wrestlers had to find creative ways to make opponents quit without using actual torture methods. The challenge became creating believable submission scenarios without crossing ethical lines. This meant developing new holds and techniques that looked painful but didn't cause lasting damage. Wrestlers learned to sell psychological pressure instead of relying on weapons that could genuinely hurt them. The psychological element of I Quit matches became problematic when combined with weapons that could cause real, lasting damage. The mental aspect of breaking someone's will to continue was compelling storytelling. But when the physical methods involved implements that could genuinely injure, the psychological drama got lost in genuine concern for wrestler safety. Audiences stopped enjoying the storytelling because they were worried about permanent injuries. WWE realized that simulated torture was crossing ethical boundaries that sports entertainment shouldn't cross. The company understood that entertainment should involve fictional violence, not methods that looked like actual torture. When matches started resembling interrogation scenes more than athletic competition, WWE knew they had gone too far beyond acceptable limits. Some stipulations push the boundaries of what audiences can stomach. Wrestling fans expect violence and danger as part of the show, but there's a difference between exciting action and disturbing brutality. When matches made viewers genuinely uncomfortable instead of entertained, WWE learned that certain concepts were too extreme, even for their audience. These extreme weapon variations were quietly phased out as WWE recognized there's a difference between believable punishment and actual cruelty. So the creative approach changed. The company shifted toward more traditional methods of creating I Quit match drama. The focus moved back to athletic competition and psychological storytelling instead of weapons that crossed ethical lines. While extreme I Quit matches were banned for being too realistic, other stipulations were banned for completely different reasons that had nothing to do with violence or safety. Judy Bagwell on a pole match. WCW's creative team somehow approved suspending Buff Bagwell's mother above a wrestling ring as entertainment. The infamous Judy Bagwell on a pole match literally had Buff Bagwell's mother suspended above the ring, representing the exact moment WCW's creative process completely broke down. Picture this scenario. Executives sat in a meeting room and decided that hanging a woman from the ceiling was good television. Not only did they approve this concept, they actually spent money to produce it and air it on national television. This notorious WCW concept became the gold standard for what not to do in professional wrestling storytelling. The match wasn't just bad. It was a masterclass in how to destroy credibility in a single segment. Every wrestling promotion since has used this match as an example of creative bankruptcy. Wrestling schools probably show footage of this match to students as a warning about what happens when shock value replaces common sense. The absurdity of this match violated every principle of good taste and wrestling logic simultaneously. Wrestling matches are supposed to be athletic competitions between trained performers. This match turned a family member into a literal prize suspended above the ring like a side of beef. The concept ignored basic human dignity while also making no sense from a competitive standpoint. Why would wrestlers fight over retrieving someone's mother from a pole? This stipulation illustrated the dangers of pushing comedy and shock value too far beyond audience tolerance. WCW was desperate to create memorable moments, but they confused memorable with watchable. Audiences remember this match because it was so terrible, not because it was entertaining. The company learned that shocking people and entertaining them are completely different goals that don't always overlap. This match became a notorious touchstone that crystallized arguments about credibility and audience trust. Wrestling fans expect certain standards even in the most ridiculous storylines. They'll accept supernatural characters, impossible physics, and over-the-top drama. But using real people as props crosses a line that destroys the fiction wrestling depends on. When promotions treat family members like objects, audiences stop investing emotionally in the product. The concept derailed any semblance of athletic competition by focusing on a ridiculous human prop instead of wrestling. Buff Bagwell and his opponent weren't showcasing their wrestling skills or building compelling drama. They were participating in a carnival sideshow that made professional wrestling look like amateur comedy theater. The match shifted attention away from athletic performance toward pure spectacle. This match proved that some outlandish concepts should never leave the writing room, let alone make it to television. Ideas that sound funny in creative meetings don't always translate to effective television. The gap between concept and execution becomes obvious when real people have to perform ridiculous scenarios on live television. Creative teams learned that brainstorming requires quality control. This match became the template for wrestling cringe, serving as a permanent reminder that shock value without wrestling merit destroys audience investment. Modern wrestling promotions study disasters like this to understand creative limits and maintain audience respect. The concept highlights how far wrestling has evolved from accepting any gimmick as acceptable entertainment. While WCW's pole match was banned from good taste, other stipulations faced different obstacles that made them equally impossible to sustain. Inferno matches. Inferno matches took pyrotechnics to their most dangerous extreme by literally surrounding wrestling rings with live flames. WWE created matches where victory required setting your opponent on fire, using real flames hot enough to burn human skin, positioned close enough to wrestlers that serious injuries were guaranteed to happen eventually. This wasn't just dramatic lighting or special effects. These were actual infernos that turned wrestling matches into fire hazards. The first Inferno match debuted at Unforgiven, In Your House, in April 1998, when Kane faced The Undertaker in WWE's most dangerous visual spectacle. Flames surrounded the entire ring perimeter, controlled by motion sensors that detected high-impact moves and responded by shooting fire higher into the air. The visual was incredible, but the concept was completely insane from a safety perspective. Victory required setting your opponent's clothing or body parts on fire, which meant every match ended with someone getting burned. The flames created serious burn hazards and visibility problems that made insurance companies faint while requiring fire marshals at every event. The intense heat distorted camera angles and made it difficult for both live audiences and television viewers to see the action clearly. Local fire departments had to approve each match and station marshals at ringside, turning wrestling events into major safety operations. The production costs skyrocketed because of all the additional personnel and equipment needed to manage live fire safely. The inability to safely rehearse matches with live fire made the stipulation inherently dangerous and unpredictable. Wrestlers couldn't practice their spots or work out timing issues when actual flames were involved. This restriction meant matches had to rely heavily on pre-planned sequences, eliminating the spontaneity that made wrestling entertaining. Performers couldn't adapt or improvise when real fire was part of the match structure, creating matches that felt scripted and limited. Open flames in a wrestling environment collided with basic safety norms and insurance realities that no legitimate business could manage. Wrestling already involved significant injury risks, but adding fire created liability issues that made workers' compensation claims for burn injuries astronomical. The combination of athletic competition and open flames violated every safety protocol that responsible companies follow. Even Kane's character fit couldn't justify the risk of having actual infernos at ringside on a regular basis. Kane's persona was built around fire and destruction, making him the perfect wrestler for this match type. But even with his supernatural character work, the risks were too high to make Inferno matches a regular occurrence. The company realized that character development couldn't override basic safety concerns that threatened performer welfare. Some visual spectacles are too dangerous to repeat, regardless of their entertainment value. The dramatic impact of flames surrounding the wrestling ring was undeniable, but the human cost was too high to justify continued use of this stipulation. The final traditional Inferno match aired in 2006, marking the end of live fire wrestling spectacles. WWE later produced a pre-recorded cinematic Firefly Inferno match in 2020, but this version relied on visual effects rather than actual flames. Inferno matches proved that fire safety trumps sports entertainment, but other stipulations faced different practical problems that made them equally impossible to sustain. Boiler room brawls. Boiler room brawls created a logistical nightmare by moving wrestling matches into WWE's actual backstage areas. The company thought they could create something unique by taking wrestlers out of the traditional ring setting and putting them in the industrial spaces behind the scenes. What seemed like a creative way to showcase different environments turned into a production disaster that made everyone involved question why they left the wrestling ring in the first place. These matches were designed to showcase backstage environments, but created production challenges that outweighed their entertainment value. WWE wanted to use the gritty, industrial look of their backstage areas to create a different kind of wrestling experience. The boiler rooms, storage areas, and utility spaces looked atmospheric and dramatic. The problem was that these spaces weren't designed for wrestling matches or television production. Boiler room brawls sounded gritty on paper, but they spawned three predictable problems: no camera angles, bad lighting, and real-world hazards. Camera operators had to navigate tight spaces filled with pipes, machinery, and random equipment while trying to follow two wrestlers who were constantly moving around. The lighting was terrible because these areas were designed for utility work, not entertainment. Viewers at home often couldn't see the action, killing engagement with what was supposed to be athletic competition. The confined spaces and equipment-filled environments created safety hazards that traditional ring matches avoided. Wrestlers had to worry about hitting their heads on low-hanging pipes, tripping over equipment, or getting injured on sharp edges that were never meant to be part of a wrestling environment. These backstage areas contained legitimate workplace hazards that had nothing to do with wrestling performance, but everything to do with potential lawsuits. The backstage setting made it difficult for audiences to follow the action or understand the match's flow. Wrestling works because audiences can see everything that happens in the ring from a clear vantage point. When matches moved to cramped backstage areas, viewers lost that clarity. The action became confusing and hard to follow, making it nearly impossible for audiences to stay engaged with what was supposed to be athletic competition. The concept worked better in theory than practice, as real backstage areas weren't designed for wrestling entertainment. On paper, using industrial backstage settings sounded like a way to add atmosphere and uniqueness to wrestling matches. In reality, these areas created more problems than they solved. The spaces were too small, too dark, and too dangerous for effective wrestling performance. These matches became more about navigating obstacles than showcasing wrestling ability. Wrestlers spent more time trying not to trip over equipment than actually wrestling each other. The focus shifted away from athletic performance towards simple survival in an environment that wasn't meant for human competition. Production limitations made these matches unsustainable for regular programming. The technical difficulties, safety concerns, and viewer confusion created too many problems for WWE to justify continuing with this match type. The company needed matches that could be filmed effectively and presented clearly to television audiences. Boiler room. Brawls quietly disappeared as WWE realized that wrestling works best in spaces actually designed for wrestling, not utility rooms. Each of these abandoned stipulations tells the same story about wrestling's journey toward finding the right balance between excitement and responsibility. WWE learned the hard way. Spectacle without safety or taste isn't sustainable. These banned matches helped shape the safer, more credibility-driven product fans enjoy today. The company discovered that some concepts were too risky, too ridiculous, or too uncomfortable for sustainable programming. WWE had to balance entertainment value with wrestler safety and audience expectations. Sometimes the most memorable wrestling moments are the ones we'll never see again, precisely because they taught the industry what not to do. Which banned match do you still find impossible to watch? And why? Drop it in the comments. Also, send a card to WWE's legal team. They deserve it. If you liked the horror show, hit like and subscribe for more wrestling history and disasters.